what I want to do is just kind of go over in a little bit more depth how to actually perform the interviews, convert individual interviews into themes across users, across customers that then you can ultimately translate into action, into product development, marketing strategy, these sorts of things, things that align really closely to your business model canvas. And the tool that's going to get you there is the Rainbow Spreadsheet. And I'm going to be back with you guys in a bootcamp session on Thursday of this upcoming week. And I want you to have performed some interviews and played around, not really played around, done some serious work, hopefully, with this Rainbow Spreadsheet. And then we can troubleshoot anything that came up together and really fine-tune your approach to both the interviews, the synthesis of key themes, and start brainstorming about next steps for action. Okay, so let's go over a few things that I touched on briefly before. Asking the right questions. You guys, Devin kicked you off with this idea of performing depth interviews. I could see a desire to probably reach as many people and many users as you can. Maybe you want to try and do a survey because you think it's easier, but at this point we can't sacrifice ease and time for really richness of experience and validating those personas. So depth interviews, as I call them, are these one-on-one interviews that are semi-structured. You came up with some questions today, but they're a way to directly obtain information from your users. And I know you're a team, but it really is best if you can do interviews one-on-one. It can be overwhelming if there's a whole group of people kind of firing questions at one potential user or customer. They could feel like they have to kind of conform to what the vibe of the group is. They can feel intimidated. So the best way is really try and keep this one-on-one, but share your insights from the interviews in the Rainbow Spreadsheet so that everyone feels like they were a part of it. Something else I would recommend, but you have to make sure your users feel comfortable with this, are recording your interviews. Now, you have to get explicit consent from your interviewees that this is okay, although it can be great to record videos. You can see their facial expressions as they're saying things, because body language is hugely important. Sometimes people will be a little bit less likely to do a video recording. So I think audio recording might be a good way to kind of kick this off, and take notes while maintaining eye contact with your users you're interviewing or your interviewees, but just jot down not what they're saying because you'll have it on the recording. But then what you can do is pop key insights from the recording into the Rainbow Spreadsheet and just jot down mid-interview anything that comes up, like somebody looked really annoyed when they were talking, or they stumbled on answering this. These sorts of, again, like body language type things, or things that you won't pick up directly on the recording but are still hugely important. Okay, so remember, you are trying to validate your BS personas with these interviews. So you're really trying to get deeper into, again, things we talked about. What's a day-to-day routine? What are the broad feelings around this thing? Where are their struggles? Where are their points of delight? What are their motivations? You have to ask the right questions. And to get at these questions, you have to keep it broad and then see where the conversation takes you. What do they want to talk about? What's really frustrating to them? Why are they fixated on something? You need to probe into their responses instead of, again, make it like a survey methodology where you're like, okay, on to the next question. Okay, thanks, enough of that. Here's what I really want to know. You check all of your biases at the door. You have a few questions that you identified that you want to ask, but that doesn't mean you aren't probing responses and following up questions based on what they're saying throughout the course of the interview. You have to do that to challenge your own perceptions. You guys are going to get started on these like now. So you actually practice today in the session, which is fantastic. But between now and Thursday, you're going to do more, and you're going to do more outside of just a convenient sample like people in this cohort with you. Okay. So again, you have to ask the right questions. We talked about what these should be. You're avoiding a convenient sample. I know interviewing might be new to you. Absolutely, I can respect that. Maybe try and do a fun fake interview, asking someone about their day-to-day routine that is a friend or family member, just to feel out your approach, to be able to actively listen and then probe a bit deeper. But what you ultimately need to do after that is really start to get to your prototypical user, okay? So friends and family are no-no for really any product or problem-focused decision-making, right? You really need to get at the user that you identified. And there are these 3 to 5 key user characteristics that came up in your persona exercise that's gonna, again, guide the identification of who these people are, okay? How are you going to get at this sample? I realize for some of you, it's going to be challenging for everyone. It's always hard stepping out of your comfort zone, right? And trying to talk to someone you wouldn't usually talk to about something that's probably fairly personal to them. So how do you ensure you have the right samples? Some of you, this will be more challenging than others. Some of you are looking at global communities that you can't actually do a face-to-face interview with in person. You might have to do phone interviews for those. You might have to do FaceTime. You might have to first start by doing interviews to try and identify who that deeper user segment is. So a good way, leaving today's boot camp and getting to your sample right away, your user group, really start doing that secondary research we talked about. Go on social media, see if there are different groups, look at trends, see if there are links to people that you can tap into. You could post something on a Facebook page, right, and see if anyone would be willing to talk to you. You can actually go to a Starbucks if you think this trait or what you're looking for in a user is very broad. Maybe you do actually just need to go to a mall, go to Central Park. I know it's cold, so maybe that's not the best one, but get out and try and find people. People will be receptive to you if they really feel like you have their best interest in heart and you're trying to better understand them. These don't have to be long interviews. They can start off very broad. If you are interested in skateboarders, I'm sure you can do some research to find out where they hang out, these sorts of things. Snowballs, again, if this is a bit more of a sensitive type of a population to get at, again, it could be a global population that's not ready available to you easily here in the United States. Maybe some of your initial interviews could be interviewing people about families they have that maybe are based in other countries and some of their habits, or starting to understand if this is, individuals that might have, again, family members or coworkers or colleagues or things like this that can help tap into that user group. Start talking to them, start at least trying to identify this user group that you can get at. So for this Thursday, I'm going to be on campus. We're going to have a really hands-on workshop, but I want you to strive to perform at least 3 interviews with potential customers. 3 to 5 would be ideal, because remember, we really want to get the hang of performing these interviews, get our comfort level up. So you're going to just have to do that with practice, practice, practice. And the other thing is, for this, we're starting to look at themes. Are these users similar? Did we maybe say our user base is a little bit too broad, and we're finding that there are different sub-personas within our larger persona? So now these interviews can say, wow, we have so many disparate themes that I think we actually need to sub-segment the user base and dig more deeply into one type. So these will be illuminating, and this is just the start of interviewing. Interviewing actually should be something that you're doing this primary research throughout the whole course of your development here. What you're going to do is find kind of like new leads to follow. Think about performing 5 interviews a week, right? What themes are emerging? Oh, these themes helped you better understand how to get in touch with this user group that you thought wasn't as readily available, but now you found connections. Or it could be, again, that you came in too narrow to your user group. You have to go back now and broaden it. So this is going to lead you closer to, again, identifying that problem, identifying your users, and honing in on the solution. I'm talking rapid interviewing for Thursday, so I am incredibly sensible to the fact that you guys, some of you might not be able to find your customers just yet for these interviews. Please, please, please don't stress. Please do interviews though. It's okay if you can't. Thursday is going to be a hands-on, like clinic almost, boot camp, where we're just like looking at your individual. We didn't get to talk about it, or I didn't get to as much today as I would have liked, to understand kind of your individual startups and what you're trying to do and understand your individual user groups. On Thursday, I want to tackle that. I want to really make sure like we're understanding, your specific users and coming up with plans to continue to interview them. So it's okay if you can't get in touch right now with your user or potential customer, but I want you to come in on Thursday and have a sense of why this is. What do you know from secondary research on who they are, where they might be, and let's come up with a plan on how you get closer to them, okay? But in the meantime, if you truly, truly, truly can't get directly to your user, or maybe a variation of your user, please at least try to do an interview, sure, with a convenient sample. This could be an acquaintance, a friend, it could be a family member, friend of a friend, on your broad topic, okay? Because this is just gonna get you comfortable with kind of probing responses to that. So if you're trying to do something about access maybe to healthy food in different countries, or maybe in food deserts, right? Like not even healthy food, but just access to food. Okay, you're trying to work at getting at that sample. You might not be able to get there now, but maybe you could start to think about, there are different food deserts, unfortunately, in the United States, even in New York City. I think the Bronx actually has some areas. Might be a good idea to try and do some interviewing, maybe with people in those locations, near those locations, just asking about some broad questions about their experience with food. What are their typical shopping and eating habits? You can start broadly based on their responses, probe deeper. So again, if you can't get to your sample and start to ask those specific questions, broaden out a little bit and get comfortable asking and interviewing within that broader topic area, okay? So methodology, I know you came up with like 10 questions you want to ask. I sometimes think about it as like 3 specific questions, and the other questions, or 7 questions that are going to come about, are literally just digging deeper into your potential customers' responses. So if you want to talk to someone about maybe their health experiences, maybe how often they go to see a doctor and what those experiences are like, you can start broadly asking about that. Please walk me through a typical visit to the doctor. Okay, so that's what you want to know. But maybe your orientation point should be a little broader than that. We talked about being able to understand motivations, pain points, day-to-day experiences, and more holistic. So before you even get into tell me about your typical experience with the doctor, you might want to broaden up one more level and start with an even broader question. Please walk me through your experience with healthcare. Someone might say, what? What do you mean? What do you want to know? See what they actually associate that with. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but you don't say, oh, I just really want to know how often you go to the doctor and like where are your pain points in that experience. You can get there, but first see what they say. Maybe they say, well, I don't really go to the doctor. Oh, so what do you do if you're not feeling well? Or do you take medications? You can kind of probe based on their responses to get a bigger picture of like the value that they put on healthcare, maybe what they're doing, workarounds if they're not going to the doctor, and pain points perhaps. This can also probe into maybe they don't have adequate healthcare to go see a physician. Maybe it's actually they do, but getting appointments is very hard for them because they have other pain points in their life where they are caring for multiple individuals and they don't have time or access or transportation. So when that comes up, you can probe on any of those things. So it's really about active listening. This is like the stuff we should be doing in our relationships all the time with friends, family, loved ones, everyone, right? That idea of when you ask a question, you actually listen to the response before asking the next question, or don't already have in your mind what it's going to be. Really kind of like taking some deep breaths, listening to what they're saying, and digging deeper. And again, not leading them. Not, as Devin said, like go into sales mode. Even if they say, I don't go see the doctor a lot, your next question shouldn't be, I have a great solution. Would you go if you had this app that did this? No way, right? That's like how many questions away, and maybe it's not even going to come, because you really want to get their organic experience. So you would say, oh, really? Why? Tell me, and based on their response, probe that line of questioning. Okay, channel your inner investigative journalist or detective. Sometimes I also like to end it with overall. So instead of, again, hey, I got this product, would you like it? Definitely at some point in your interviews, you are going to start asking specific questions about your potential solution. And I mean in the course of not each individual interview, I mean like you guys are going to be doing 5 interviews a week. This could be weeks from now where you start talking about your specific solution, because it might need to kind of change a little bit. So sometimes I won't even end by asking about the solution as we see it or I see it, but kind of get a sense like, what's the best part of your experience with healthcare currently? What's the one area that can use the most improvement? That's sort of giving them a chance to come up with a solution that's targeted to them, okay? And that should provide you with some thematic insight, okay? So to reiterate, for Thursday, you're going to perform at least 3 to 5 interviews with users. And now the part we're going to get to is how you're going to extract these key themes so that you see not all of these individual, this person said that, that person said that. How do you start to see, oh, but they're saying the same things related to this? Or actually, I'm seeing some trends that the bigger issue around healthcare isn't insurance, it's around transportation. I don't know that that's it, just some examples, but maybe that would be because you've noticed when you tried to have a conversation about healthcare, 5 out of 6 people mention transportation issues. But how will you know 5 out of 6? Well, the rainbow spreadsheet that we touched on at a super high level is a really easy, lightweight, and visual way to identify these themes. So everyone is getting this template. It is a rainbow spreadsheet, and you can make a copy of it. There's instructions on how to use it. We went over it at the highest level. I'm just going to dig into a little bit more now. This is something that you should, again, save a copy for you, customize it to your study, share it with your team. The beauty of this spreadsheet is you can all be working from the same place iteratively. You can all be listening to an interview your teammate did and extracting themes in real time and populating this. One of you could be doing an interview one place, someone in the other place at the same time, and you can be populating the themes here, okay? What you do is basically any observation that comes up in your interviews, again, not related to your product, related to the key persona questions that we went over. Something about a motivation, something about a day-to-day habit. This is an observation that you want to populate in the spreadsheet, okay? So let me take you through an example. So whenever you have an interview, you document who your customer is. If you have their name, put their name down. If you're going anonymously and you don't want to document that, it's just important that you always document some key characteristics that are of interest to you, right? We talked about some of those demographic things. Maybe there's certain screening criteria. They need to be a skateboarder. They need to have experienced chronic pain. So maybe kind of a screener thing or a characteristic would be getting what's the diagnosis? What's their job role? How long have they been in kind of this community? Okay, so whatever works for you, then you have at it. So whoever that customer one was, that's maybe your first interview, they're talking about healthcare and something comes up. You could try to do this in real time as you're interviewing them, but I think it's so important to have a bond with them and eye contact, not have a barrier of a computer. That's where I think it's actually important to record the session and then probably document this when you listen to it again. But something comes up about transportation. So you could put that in your first row, right? You could just type that in. Transportation issues. That was mentioned by the first participant, the first customer. So you make a copy of their color. They're this like reddish, rusty, whatever that color is, and it came up there, okay? You go on, you continue this interview. They are talking about insurance issues. They're talking about how every time there's a long wait when they've been to a clinic. So basically everything they say, you just copy this down, okay? Cool. Interesting. You have some really in-depth feedback that you've been able to really just bubble up at the highest level. Now you or your teammate does another interview. You're following the same script, the same broad questions, although you have a similar approach to probing, following where it's going. Hey, this person mentioned transportation too. That's really interesting. right? But then they bring up a different point that hasn't been raised as well. So maybe it's something about taking care of parents, that they're more concerned about their parents' health, so they actually don't think about their health very much. Now we have a specific insight for only C2 that didn't come up, but all the observations across all the interviews you do are going to be here in this column. Every time you hear something similar, this person brought up taking care of their parents. You document that. I might have put that in the wrong row. Sorry. Okay, so you stay true to the color. Ultimately, then, if there's a second level theme, okay, where maybe something comes up for waiting, and you've heard now it's a long wait to get an appointment, but then someone else is saying, really, there's a long wait when you're at the doctor, right? So you can have two separate themes here. You can have wait to schedule, right? Wait to be seen. Okay, and ultimately say these things come up. There could be like wait to get results. At some point, this list gets so long where you're taking these top level themes take on kind of a broader theme where, you know what, there's just a bigger issue of waiting, right? And so maybe at that point, you delete these rows and you merge it all into waiting, and you say that waiting is made up of scheduling, of being seen, of results, right? So you always have this idea of how you can break it down. So there might be something that you feel like are individual themes, but ultimately it just bubbles up to one, but you want to maintain some of those nuances. You put that in your second level category. You have a note here. One, if you're not sure what they mean by this, or you've coded it a certain way and you want your teammates to just confirm that, then you could just put a note there about, you know, it was unclear if this was related to this, or we need to look at this more deeply, or maybe we should adjust the script a little bit to ask something a little bit more specifically around transportation to start because it keeps coming up. So these are notes. You and your team can go over it. There's also additional note section here. So if you're noticing that, again, there's like waiting to be seen, waiting to get a prescription, waiting to do this, blah, 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 you might say, hey guys, I want to discuss, I didn't just want to do it on my own, but I noticed there's a lot of themes around waiting. Should we actually just bubble this up into waiting generally and make a second level theme around the type? You put your name, it was raised by this person, and ultimately it could be pending. The next time you get with your group, you'll talk about it and say, hey, I went ahead and changed it. After you get through your observations for the week, it's important for you guys to then sit down as a group and say, what did we see here? What are the primary findings we know? So maybe, again, related to healthcare, there's an issue with transportation. There's an issue with waiting. There's an issue with people putting others' health before their own. These are the primary findings. You always want to think about, how did these influence? And it might be harder to see that earlier on, but think about this. What does this maybe say about the segments we should be pursuing? Are we actually having the right users being interviewed? Should we expand this? Should we narrow it? Does this change the scope of our problem or opportunity? Maybe there's something now that we're getting at where, hey, there is an opportunity, it seems, to provide this app for certain medical care. But if there is an in-person component, it's probably a good idea if we could merge that with some transportation. Let's explore those options, right? So you come up with these different value propositions and problem opportunities. Things start, so maybe like a key partner would be a ride-sharing app, right? So you start to see these things emerging. You don't want to jump the gun after just a few interviews, but you want to keep tracking this over time. Okay, that's the beauty of it. I hope that seems like the beauty of it. Let me go through an example at a super high level, although we kind of walked through one. So I was a professor at Stony Brook, and something I noticed if I wanted to start a business or solve a solution is that, I was a professor at Stony Brook, but at City College. This is where I had this idea. So City College, what I saw from my students was that a lot of you all have commutes, that you have long commutes to school, and when you get to school, you're pretty much there for the full day until you turn around and go back on a long commute. You guys have busy lifestyles, you're working, you're doing extracurriculars, and you're doing a lot of schoolwork. So what I noticed was that a lot of my students were obviously very short on time and expendable cash, like college students generally are. You have these long commutes and busy lifestyles. And I noticed in my classes that students were forgetting things, and it was impacting their ability to partake in the class or to really focus. And who doesn't forget something, in my opinion, right? That's hard to do. You're getting ready for the day, you're getting ready for a long commute. But what if you forget a book or a resource we're looking at? Or what if you actually forget your computer? What if you forget snacks to help like fuel you through the lecture and stay focused? I had a lot of students who had to dip out of class to go get food, and food isn't always super close at City College, right? So these are things that I thought, maybe there's room for like a student delivery service. There seems to be like a lot of things that students could use in real time, but they've forgotten at home. They can't go back to get it, but their experience is compromised in class because they're missing these really key things. So this is just an idea, but again, I'm based on that example, still like the mother of the newborn, looking at it from my professor perspective, and my key user of this would not be another professor, it would be a student. So I might be making too many assumptions about students and their day-to-day schedules, if they forget things, and if they personally feel like their experiences are being compromised. So what I need to do is think about, first check all of my sort of thoughts and concerns and hypotheses and biases at the door, and I need to just start doing some interviews with college students completely unbiased. Okay, so what I need to do is get in touch with college students, and I thought this seemed to be, my hypotheses are that this is especially important for students at commuter schools in the city where there's not as many resources to get easily to like a bookstore to buy a notebook you had forgotten, or get super easily to a computer to access certain files, or easily get to a cafe or a nice healthy restaurant to buy lunch quickly and get back to your class. So that being said, I wanted to do a recruit. I can think about how do I get to a nice diverse set of college students at kind of these busy campuses that students tend to commute to. There's not a lot of on-campus housing, and the majority of students don't stay there. So ultimately, I recruited students from a few different schools, and I could look at Facebook pages for these schools. I could go to the schools and ask them to participate in the interviews, so we can think about these sorts of, again, approaches. But once I actually found students, I didn't want to go to them directly and say, hey, I have this great idea for an app. It's like a student delivery service. What do you think? Wouldn't it be great? Usually when you ask people stuff like that, they're kind of led to say, yeah, it'd be great. Sure, that'd be great. But the thing is, what people say they want and what they'll actually pay money for when it's a possibility are quite different, right? So it's more important, again, to understand that larger experience of the student. So with some interviews, and I'm not going to get into this too much because I want you all to actually be able to kind of go through these resources. You'll have access to all of these, but just some like examples of transcripts from a few interviews performed. Okay, so basically not starting off again with forgetting something. If you notice, that's the last question that's asked. I ideally would like to see if that comes up when I start to ask students about a typical experience commuting to CCNY. Okay, so I think it's important for you to provide your users the opportunity to identify a problem on their own before just assuming it's a problem and asking their experience with it. So we can start off by just asking about, tell me about your typical commuting experience leading into their day, and then ultimately, if they haven't brought it up yet, probing this idea of having forgotten something. These are just some kind of fake transcripts of potential interviews, but you could see if this continued on, and there was a spreadsheet that was populated based on the themes that came up. And if you notice, there's nothing really about forgetting early on, right? If we were really honing in on our problem, that would be the first thing, but it's not. So from these interviews, students started off talking about these commutes. Some would say, I have a 15-minute commute, but mostly it was, I have an hour commute, I have a 30-minute commute, I have 45 minutes, I have over an hour, right? I take the one train, then I transfer to the bus. If you notice, that level of specificity is not a top-level thing. So what theme emerged was that it seems like people are taking 30 minutes to an hour, okay? Then we could break out specific time frequencies, but you always want to bubble up a theme to, again, its highest level. So I don't have one row that says, oh, the 7 to the 1 to the, then I walk. It's basically just that on each commute, it turns out students are taking multiple modes of transportation. What came up a lot is that students choose to get coffee on their way in. Then there were some comments about things that were forgotten, but there was a lot of other things as well. And you could see, if you look, where are the dominant themes? Where are things that are going to help you better understand your user, better hone in on your problem, and probably give you new areas you want to probe deeper into. So this idea, very specific routine, that seems to come up quite a bit. Some of these earlier themes come up a bit. Idea that it involves walking. Now, why does that matter? Well, it's just something that students have said, so it's important to document it. But when you're then kind of coming up with your primary findings, if I'm developing an app that students might need to access on their commute, if that's when we also find out they're forgetting something, isn't it important to know that there's an opportunity for them to have service to access an app and engage with it? If it was clear that they were on the subway the whole time and didn't have these periods of walking, then there might be a concern that this app would be a waste if it's meant to be used on their commute if they couldn't actually access it, okay? So looking through this, something else that's documented here, although things like forgotten flash drives, supplies for class, these sorts of things are coming up, 18 is an important row. For almost the majority of the sample, it's important to note that forgetting was not something top of mind that they brought up as a need to be improved. It was something that came up when it was further probed, but when you ask what's your biggest pain point in your day, they didn't say it's that I forget something and I can't actually do my work, or I forget something and I'm hungry in class. It doesn't mean we can't pursue that, because we do see that there's a lot of things that are being forgotten, but it's really kind of a reality check for us that this is not the thing that's top of mind. So even if this is something that we can provide value with because it's occurring, the way that we're going to need to position it is in a way that kind of gets their attention or makes them aware that this is occurring, or that this could be adding value to other pieces that are more top of mind, okay? So I don't want to get too much more into that. You now have all the resources. What I want you to do is look at this a little bit, kind of get a sense of how it's being used. There's no primary findings or anything like that yet. Some examples of like things you might want to discuss. But this is just an example, okay? Just to kind of give you a sense of how this would work. But what I really do want you to do is download this original file, which I'll clean up a bit before I share. And I want you to start your interview process. And I want you to start to try and identify what some of these themes are based on your interviews, where you might want to break them in and add a little bit more nuance and clarity, or where eventually you start to identify some things that you could bubble up and make a broader category like weighting, okay? So get comfortable with this approach, right? So integrate 3 to 5 interviews. Ultimately kind of think, what are the key themes or findings that have emerged, and come up with an idea of how you think those could translate into your BMC, your business model canvas, okay? I think I've talked more about this. You'll have the slides to revisit, but this idea of starting your interviews really up top here, not specifically down here about forgetting, about very specific things related to your topic. You want up here. Ultimately, then you probe and lead down here. So probe just means like follow up on what they're saying. Get more deeper meaning into it. How big of a problem is it? Ultimately, again, the goal is to be able to translate themes into, in time, your business model canvas. What activities are important? What are some of the resources you're going to need here? Channels that you can actually reach your customers. That's the end of it. I hope that makes sense with the rainbow spreadsheet, but hey, I think it's an art to interview people. It takes a lot of practice. I think it also takes some time to get friendly with the spreadsheet. So all I want you to do is just try it out and come on Thursday with, again, any questions about the nuances of your sample, how you actually reach users. If you're having issues, we'll troubleshoot ways to get to them. Issues with the interview. Did you find you couldn't stop leading them? Was it really super awkward and you need some tips on how to make it less so? Or the spreadsheet. Okay, so we're going to spend a lot of time on those things. I can't wait for Thursday to hear about your specific experiences, and good luck. I will see you then.